Welcome, everybody. Great to have you here. We're going to go live in 3 minutes, so please make sure that you can hear us and you can see us, and we'll get started soon.
Mic test.
Thanks, Kate. We can hear you.
Let us know if you can hear me on the chat.
Welcome. My name is Ann Lair from the Center for Human Capital Innovation, and it is wonderful to have you here with us for our second webinar in the NAVFAC Supervisory Academy series. Today we're going to be talking about building trust. Before we do that, we want to let you know that NAVFAC is transforming how it develops its employees, and this Supervisor Academy is a test of how they're going to be doing that. What is the Academy? The Academy is a way that we can make sure that there is workforce development for a large group of NAVFAC employees in many different ways. So when you think about the Academy, we're starting off with supervisors. Why? Because supervisors are the backbone of NAVFAC. There is a direct relationship between supervisors and how they are making sure that we have increased employee engagement. We also make sure there's increased productivity and overall performance. So that's what we're going to be doing. As I said, today is the second in our series of 6 webinars as part of the Academy, and we are talking about building trust today, and we are so excited to have the CMO, Mr. Paul Pollock, joining us. Paul, great to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Paul, before we get started talking about what is trust and the skill sets of trust, tell me about why a busy supervisor who has so many things to think about should think about building trust as one of their job skills.
Well, Ann, if you have trust in your organization between a supervisor and their team, and that group has trust institutionally with the rest of NAVFAC, 2 things happen. One is everyone's working towards a common goal based on the needs the Navy has of NAVFAC. And then when everyone has that same goal, everyone has a common understanding of their roles and responsibilities, that enables them to work easier together, quicker together, and then so the speed of our effect that we have upon the Navy becomes that much greater.
So I get the common goal piece, and that makes sense. And I also get, again, that supervisors are really busy, a lot going on, a lot of changes. So if I was a supervisor, I would probably be thinking right now, what's in it for me? How is it going to help me be more productive if I learn how to build trust?
Well, NAVFAC has an expectation of each one of our supervisors, and they're held to a specific set of goals, a specific set of execution effect. And if you have trust as a supervisor with your team, you get the full effect of everyone on that team working for the objectives to which you're held accountable for.
And so if I'm working toward the same objectives, then what?
NAVFAC executes its mission. NAVFAC does what the Navy needs in support of Naval and Marine Corps forces.
So if I hear you correctly, really thinking about building trust is a way for me as a supervisor to actually be more productive and to help my employees actually become more effective.
Absolutely.
All right, let's get started and talk about building trust then. Before we do that, let's take a few minutes to talk about some housekeeping items. You will notice at the top of your screen on the right-hand side some yellow sticky notes. Please pay attention to those because that's what we're going to inform you of anything that you may need to know. The next thing we want to remind you about is that we know many of you have asked for the slides ahead of time. We sent a note out yesterday that it's posted on MillSuite in the Building Trust calendar event, so go ahead and download those slides if you haven't done so already. This is going to be very interactive, so there is going to be some polls, so pay attention to those because we do value your feedback. In addition, what's going to be happening is we will be giving you one continuous learning point for attending the webinar as well as filling out the post-webinar survey. So go ahead and do that, and we will send that certificate to you on Fridays. The other things we want to let you know is that there is a chat box. Please go ahead and type in your question to the chat box. We have a moderator waiting, and we'll use those for our Q&A. In addition, we'd like you to keep the chat to chat that is relevant to the content of the webinar only. Our back-end analytics let us know who is on chat, so we don't need to know who is on and off chat right now. And then finally, the post-webinar link will be sent to you afterwards, and it will be posted on the last slide. So go ahead and fill that out so that we know how to improve. Now, let's get to that first slide that you see right here, and let's talk about actually the objectives of today. Today, what we want to do is to make sure that people understand what is trust, how is it made up, and we want you to have an action plan, a simple one, that you can implement right away and make sure that you are ready to start building trust with your directs. Let's talk about how we're going to do that. What we're going to talk about is what is trust, what is it made up of, the components of it. We're also going to be talking about 3 different skill sets that you can use right away to build trust. And then finally, we're going to have you work on an action plan as well as see a demo and hear Mr. Pollock's thoughts about that. So let's talk about the interactive part. I mentioned that there is a poll. So here you see our first poll, and the question is right there for you. How often on a regular basis do you intentionally try to build trust? So we're really looking at that intentional piece right here. So Paul, while we're waiting for the results, I'm curious, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 meaning all the time, 1 being not much, how often do you intentionally try to build trust?
It's a 10. It happens every single day. It's every part of how we organize our work and our priorities in our office. It's fundamental.
Every single day?
Every single day.
Like how much of every single day?
Multiple times every hour. It's every single discussion that we have. We're aligning to our purpose. We're aligning to what each team member's roles and responsibilities are, what they're doing to execute NAVFAC's mission. And once you have that common understanding between each other, you're inherently building trust.
Wow, so you intentionally do it multiple times in a day?
It's just part of our DNA now. It's part of our nature.
Wow, so that's part of your DNA. Let's see what our results are. So it looks like supervisors agree with you. Looks like 47% at this point say they regularly try to think about it as well. So great news. So for those of you who regularly do it, we have some tips that maybe you're not using right now. For those of you who haven't been using it as much or been as intentional, we also have some tips as well that you can implement in your action plan. So let's talk about trust, and let's talk about what is it. It's one of those words that can be a little confusing sometimes. We all think we know what it means, but we don't. So what is trust when we break it down into the actual definition? And it is the assured reliance about the capabilities, the strengths, the character of someone or something. If I were to break that down, what jumps out at me is 3 things. Assured. So this means it is consistent. It means that we can count on it to always be happening. Reliance, that means it's reliable, that we know that it's going to be happening, whatever the person said or whatever we expected is happening, and that it is about bringing our strengths, our capabilities into it. So that's our definition of trust. Now, when we think about trust, we often think of it as either high trust, low trust, that kind of thing. So, Paul, I'm curious, at NAVFAC, when you go around in the field, at headquarters, what do you notice in a team, like specific, tangible behaviors that would automatically tell you if a team has high trust or low trust?
First and foremost, if a team understands their purpose in the exact same way, and there's a uniform expectation of why they exist, what they do in support of our naval forces, there's that to me is the first start of high trust. Then does each person in the team know their roles and responsibilities, and can you see an inherent motivation in that they know why they're at work, they know why they get up every day in the morning and come to work for NAVFAC. There's been a great alignment in those types of teams, and you can't achieve alignment without achieving some level of trust.
So I'm hearing very tangible things. I'm hearing motivation, I'm hearing roles and responsibilities. So there's actually a systematic, intentional way to building trust that you could actually see or not see.
Yes, there is.
Wow. All right, so let's talk about what that actually looks like and how we would know. And let's talk about the business case for trust, because again, a lot of people say, oh, trust, it's one of those things that I'll work on someday. Right now, I have to work on the technical skills of my team or the technical skills for the peer, whatever it may be. But that's kind of in the future. And when you look at the research, it's very clear that trust will actually help you be a better supervisor. How is that? Well, on this slide right here are just some statistics that talk about when there is increased trust in an organization. There's a few things that you will see. You will see decreased stress levels. You will also see more energy or excitement about doing something, and you will see higher productivity. Pretty staggering, the numbers that you see here. Now let's talk about teams specifically on our next slide. So on our next slide, we talk about teams that show trust and teams that do not have trust. On this one, we talk about if a team has trust, what do we normally see? What would we actually hear or see in terms of behaviors? And what we see is that when teams have trust, that there's kind of an assumed best intention, that there's kind of an assumed positive outlook. And when we walk into team meetings and situations where we have that, we tend to give the person the benefit of the doubt. Mm-hmm. And as a result, we tend to listen better. Yes. And then have a better chance of increasing and hitting our goals. Now, the converse is true in our next slide, that when teams do not have that trust, what happens is instead of walking in with the best of intentions, they actually kind of walk in with a bit of suspicion. And then that suspicion, when it rolls out to everybody else on the team, what happens is then we start to get a bit of defensiveness, a lot more silos, and as a result, we don't hit our team goals and we're not as productive. So we can see how tangible behaviors of do I trust you translates into do I give you the benefit of the doubt, translates into okay, we're going to work together better, and conversely, actually is why in that first slide, perhaps why we have less stress, why we have more engagement, why we have more productivity. So we can understand that trust is not a soft skill, if you want to use that word. It's really something that is crucial that if supervisors focus on it, they could actually become more productive quickly. Fantastic. Mm-hmm. So as we think about that, we've laid the case out. Easier said than done, right? It's one of those things, just like anything. We need intentionality. We need practice as we think about that. As you think about high trust and low trust on teams, what is it that you look for that helps you start to understand what it is? And what I'm looking for specifically is I recently heard that you have had 4 changes in your job series. 4, yeah. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's true.
4, yeah. And not always in your bailiwick, from what I understand.
Yeah. So in my NAVFAC career, I've been in 4 different business and support lines, 4 different communities, and I'm an architect by training. And so my first major leadership role was as the capital improvements director at NAVFAC Hawaii. Obviously, architecture, design, and construction relates to that mission. And my next major assignment was as the operations officer at NAVFAC Pacific. In both those cases, I had knowledge that allowed me to serve as a subject matter expert, and so I already instinctively understood how the staff, the people in those organizations looked at problems, what we had a common vocabulary. So what we did to build trust is we focused on our larger mission and a larger goal. Not only just what NAVFAC does for the Navy at the macro level, but the specific program that we were asked to execute, the projects that needed to proceed in a certain time and within a certain budget. And it wasn't about me or what I wanted. It was about what the organization needs and what each person on that team was doing to collectively achieve that goal. So having an institutional view that's common to everyone was successful in achieving trust. Then I moved to another role as the comptroller at NAVFAC Pacific, and that was a very different role because I was no longer the subject matter expert. And what I needed to do to make that team successful is really change my role. Not only did we talk about the same larger goals and what NAVFAC does for the Navy, but we also, my personal role was how could I make each one of those subject matter experts successful? What could I do to accelerate their career, accelerate the work environment, to make them able to work more efficiently? So it was a servant leadership type of model that was really, it was born out of necessity because I wasn't subject matter expert. But the great result, in my view, is that it allowed a larger effect. Is when everyone on the team is pushing towards the same goal, the effect is so much greater than simply one leader. And so through that trust, we were able to achieve a great many things. In my current role as the Chief Management Officer at NAVFAC, it's a very similar situation. There are experts within my team that my role is how do I make them successful? How do I align everyone towards the chief strategic design and the goals of the Navy? And I wish I had learned that lesson back when I was in the design and construction community, because what I found is even if you are the subject matter expert, it's utilizing the collectiveness of that team that really has the greater effect for the Navy. And those different experiences kind of allowed me to learn that lesson.
So lots of lessons learned, lots of experience. Sometimes you're the subject matter expert, sometimes you weren't. If you were to summarize just one lesson that you would love the supervisors to take away in building trust, whether they're subject matter expert or not, what's the lesson you want them to remember?
It's not about you. And what I mean by that is you need, don't work in the first person, don't work in terms of what I want. It's what the team needs to be successful, and it's what, in the third person, it's what the larger Navy needs from NAVFAC. And if you focus the team on what they need and what our organization and our Navy needs, that begins to build and enrich the trust that's necessary to be the most effective possible as a group.
There you have it. Lesson number one from Mr. Pollock, really thinking about, it's not about us as supervisors, and really thinking about the we word there and building that trust. Excellent. So let's talk about trust and where it comes from. I know you're a fan of a book called The Speed of Trust.
I am.
If those of you have not heard of this book, I encourage you to write it down. It's called The Speed of Trust. It's by Stephen Covey Jr., and we're going to be talking about his work on the webinar today. According to Stephen Covey Jr., there are 5 waves of trust. The first wave, as you see here on the slide, is self-trust. The second wave is relationship trust. After that, it's followed by organizational trust. The fourth wave is market trust, as in the market. And then finally, we go to societal trust. So those are the 5 waves of trust. Each one of those build upon each other. We have to have that self-trust first. Who am I as a person? Am I trustworthy? Then we go out to relationship trust in terms of those I work with, those I touch at an immediate circuit in terms of my direct reports, my colleagues, my peers. Then we go out to larger NAVFAC, organizational trust. Then we go out to the whole market and eventually to societal. We're going to focus just on the first 3 today, and we're going to talk about self-trust, organizational trust, and relationship trust. So let's talk about the first one here. As we talk about self-trust, what does it mean? As you see on the screen right here, this slide basically tells you everything you need to know about trust. According to Stephen Covey Jr., what he says is that trust can be broken down into 2 things, character and competence. That's all it is, character and competence. Then if you look down on the slide, you'll see he has broken those down into 2 things, and then he has actually listed specific behaviors that you can practice as supervisors. And that's what I love about Covey Jr.'s work, is that he makes trust, this kind of vague idea, very practical into specific behaviors. So again, when we think about self-trust, am I someone who is trustworthy? It's about character and competence. So the character is about intent and integrity. And then again, you can see it broken down in specific skills about transparency, that kind of thing. And then the second one is about competency. It's about the results and do I get things done and my capabilities. So this is a great thing for you to remember. If there's nothing else from this webinar that I want you to remember, is this slide in terms of how are you showing up in character and competence, and really breaking it down to intent and integrity, and then finally into capabilities and results. So Paul, would love to learn from you as you think about this idea about self-trust. And am I someone that is trustworthy? I'm really curious, how do you build self-trust on a daily basis with the people you work with?
Well, Covey's model of character and competence really is the right starting point. And on the competence side, as a systems command, the Navy expects NAVFAC to be subject matter experts. And there is a degree of subject expertise in whatever it happens to be that people expect from you. And if they see it and understand it, then trust can build from there. On the character side, the word on that model that really resonates with me is integrity. And the reason, and that has been a fundamental building block of building trust with me and with my organizations, especially when I have them in the subject matter expert, because everyone needs to know that I'm going to do what I said I was going to do. And so one of the things that I tried to lay forward to build that is I lay out kind of my principles or my beliefs, how I wish to conduct myself, how I want our organization to work within the Navy, and I set a set of rules that I share with my team, and I ask them to hold me accountable to it. And my goal, again, whether they happen to believe or don't believe any of those particular rules or beliefs, is a secondary issue. The primary issue is, am I acting consistent with what I said I was intending to do? And if I was, then I'm building, to me, that's an expression of integrity. And that integrity and that predictability and consistency of behavior builds familiarity and then therefore trust with the team. So integrity, maintaining integrity, that you're consistent about who you are and what you believe, and that you do what you say you're going to do, is extremely important to building all of the frameworks for trust that starts with yourself and then emulates to people around you.
So again, what you've done is you've taken this word integrity, which again everybody defines their own way, and you've broken into specific behaviors. I said I was going to do something. Did I do it?
Yes.
And you can measure it. That's something that is measurable. Integrity, kind of hard to measure, but I said I was going to do it on this day. Did I do it? We can measure that. Great. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Remember, there's 5 waves. We're going to talk about the first one is self-trust. The second wave is relationship trust. Now on this slide, again, you still see character and competence, broken it down a little bit here. And then at the bottom of the slide, if you put the 2 together, that's what you get in those final 3 words at the bottom there. And so as we think about relationship trust, we're expanding out. So the self-trust is about me. Am I someone who is trustworthy? Now it's about my relationships, the relationships of people I work with. And so as a supervisor, you work with a lot of people, you have a lot of relationships. And so as we start to think about this, we're really thinking about, is it someone who listens? Talked about that in our first webinar. If you missed that, go ahead and listen to the replay in terms of coaching and listening. And am I keeping my commitments? Kind of what you talked about, that about integrity. That's a behavior under integrity. And have I then started to extend my trust out to people? Paul, I have a question for you that I know many of our supervisors may be thinking. This relationship trust idea, does it matter what grade someone is at and what functional area someone is at when it talks about relationship trust?
I don't think so at all. Relationship trust is a factor of interpersonal engagement and building a common expectation between 2 parties. So as we talked about, I've been in different communities within NAVFAC, and the fundamentals to build this trust have applied equally in each of those communities. It applies whether you're in a wage grade or a GS position. It applies equally by gender and by any other demographics. It's simply the fundamentals of human interaction in a way that's comfortable for both parties.
Great, thanks. All right, let's go into the third wave now. We've talked about the first 2. So the third wave is talking about organizational trust. So we're expanding out now into NAVFAC. So first it was about me, then it was about the relationships, and now we're going to the broader mission and into the organizational trust. What you see here on the slide are things that tell you if we see low trust or high trust in an organization. Every one of these things is things that you could work on as a supervisor. Again, notice how Paul broke down integrity into specific behaviors. You could take every one of these and break it down into specific behaviors. The one that I really wanted to talk about as we start to think about it is we're really thinking about how do I show up in the organization and align it with the mission? Another way to say that could be known as purpose. We're going to be talking about purpose in our 4th webinar with Admiral Korka. What I'd like to know from you, Paul, is if you start to think about the relationship as well as the organizational trust, what are some very specific things that supervisors can do to create that organizational trust? Because we've gone beyond my team to something much bigger. That's a lot harder. What are some specific best practices there?
Well, I think we've got to start from micro to macro. You have to start with obviously your self-trust and the integrity, and then you build. The next step is relationship trust. And every time that I've gone to a new office in these 4 different communities that I've been in, I've made a point of meeting one-on-one with every single person in that group at every level of the organization. And I want to have a discussion about them. I want to understand their career goals. I want to know what I can do to help those career goals. I want to understand what their view of their mission is, what their view of their work environment, what they like about it, what they don't like about it. And by doing that, it's going back to that model of how can I make them successful and move impediments out of their way. We just watched the Super Bowl this weekend. I would like to suggest that I'm the role of the offensive lineman, moving things out of the way so they can go make the play. And by working on what I can do to help them, I think it breaks down the barriers of not knowing each other, or maybe meeting people for the first time. And every single time I've done that, I've been able to build some type of a relationship trust with my shipmate. And then once you have that relationship trust, then you can talk about, here's the Navy's larger mission. Here's NAVFAC's strategic design. Here are the things that the Navy expects and needs from NAVFAC, and how does our organizational group work in the same way together towards that goal?
Wow, it's a lot of intentionality.
You got to do it.
You got to do it. So you said earlier, you have a meeting with each person and you talk about their goals. That's a lot of time. Supervisors don't have this kind of time. What's so important about this?
Well, because it's foundational. It sets up the relationship. It sets up the common expectations and the trust that you need to be successful starts with the relationship you have with your teammates. And I would offer to everyone listening, setting up that level of relationship up front when you first are in a new position is simply the investment you need to make to achieve the desired results down the road.
What if someone's not in a new position? What if they've been the supervisor for a year? What do they do then?
There's no time like the present to enrich the trust you already have, or perhaps rebuild trust that maybe you've lost because of some unfortunate incident, by starting with the same formula. Get to know the people within your work group and find common ground, and that common ground and that resilience that you cited before will get you to the trust you seek.
Wow, great best practices. So let's talk about the skills that you need to build trust. So we've talked about what trust is, talked about the business case for it. We've seen examples of how it's done at NAVFAC, what you would see, what you wouldn't see. And what we're going to talk about now are 3 specific skills that you as a supervisor can focus on building and improving. We're going to talk about transparency, recognition, and accountability, and give you specific things that you can put in your action plan that you can start to focus on these. So let's talk about our first one, our next slide. We're going to talk about creating transparency. So as we think about creating transparency, again, transparency is one of those words no one really knows what it means. It can be broken down into specific behaviors. You see some of them listed here. We're not going to go into each one. The one that I find particularly interesting, though, if you start to look about it, though, is explaining decisions. For me, this one really resonates because this can break or build trust very quickly. Let me give you an example. Let's say, for example, Paul, that you ask me to give you some input for a briefing. Okay, so I go off and I do it and I'm so excited and I give it to you and I hear nothing from you. I don't know what happened to it. Did you even read it? Right? That will break trust, and that will also break my commitment. Why do I want to do this again? Because he didn't even do anything with it. So this whole idea of decision making is really crucial because if you communicate whatever it is, hey, Anne, I need your input and I'm going to take it into consideration. All right, fair enough. Or, hey, Anne, I need your input and you actually have a say. It's going to be a consensus. All right, right on. Mm-hmm. Or, hey, Anne, I need your input. It's a democracy. We all get an equal vote. At least then I know what's going on. But if there is no transparency around decision making, that can just break my trust and my commitment. So again, one very practical skill set that you can focus on when we get to your action plan about building the transparency. So that's the first skill set. We think about the transparency. Let's go on to our second skill set. And our second skill set is giving recognition. Now, there's a few things we want to talk about here. So we're going to spend a little bit of time here and actually do a demonstration. So as we think about giving recognition, a few things we want you to think about is, first of all, that it needs to be tangible. It needs to be something that is behaviorable, measurable, observable. In addition, we want it to be personal. We want it to be to Anne, not to everybody in the room. We want it to be something that means something to me. We also want it to be public. Now, public doesn't mean a coin every time. Public doesn't mean we have to shout to the rooftops every time. But every once in a while, seeing someone, inviting them in, letting them know, that is something that really goes a long way. So as we think about this recognition idea, another thing to think about is it institutional or is it tactical? What I mean by that is it something that is real time? That's the tactical piece. Is it something that, hey, Anne, I noticed in this meeting and it's real time? Or is it something more institutional, which might be more of a formal setting, a coin, a formal recognition? And both have their place. It's important to realize as a supervisor, what is the most appropriate for the situation? What is most important for the person? So what we're going to do right now is we're going to go into a very quick demo that really helps you understand what do we mean about recognition versus praise. Because people get this a little confused sometimes. And as a supervisor, again, you're going to make an action plan in a few minutes that helps you understand what you want to practice in terms of increasing and building trust. So here goes the demo. What we're going to do is we're going to talk together, and I'm going to first give Paul some praise, and then I'm going to give him some recognition, and then we're going to talk about the difference. So let's go first with the praise. So in case you are not aware of, to do this kind of work that Mr. Pollock is doing right now, it actually takes a lot of preparation. That's the backdrop that you need for this situation. Let's go with praise first. Hey, Paul, thanks so much for the webinar. Great job.
Thank you.
That's it?
That's it.
All right, thanks. So that was praise. It was not tangible. It was not personable to him. And it really didn't mean anything. Let me now give an example of recognition. Paul, I know that to come and sit here, actually there was a lot of work at the back end. We had a call together for almost an hour to prepare for it and to think about what you wanted to say. You came early for the rehearsal. I know you studied your notes and really thought about the talking points that you wanted to make, and you're here right now. That takes a lot of commitment to the supervisors and to NAVFAC.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate that. It was very thoughtful that you recognized all the work that I had to do to prepare for this.
Yeah. So we're done with that demonstration, but want to talk to Paul, like what was the difference for you in those two?
Empathy. You really understood and appreciated or communicated that to me. There was an understanding of what the effort involved. I felt I could tell that you cared about what you were saying.
Right. So that's the difference. When we talk about recognition as the second skill set, we're talking about the second one that you saw there. Takes a little bit of practice, definitely takes some listening. And again, if that's something you want to work on when we get to the action plan, that's where you're going to be writing it down. So let's go on to our third skill set now. And our third skill set is creating accountability. Now on the slide, again, you see some very tangible behaviors you can focus on as a supervisor to create accountability. We're going to be talking about expectations and a webinar coming up soon. So stay tuned for that one with Admiral Korka. But I want to talk to Paul about setting expectations because, Paul, I understand that you have your own way of setting expectations. I heard it through the grapevine. So tell me about that.
Okay. Yeah, I have kind of a three-step process.
You even brought it.
I brought a picture of it with me here. It's a slide, or it's something on the wall that everyone on my team is very familiar with, and it's what I call the three fundamental steps of leadership. And I believe at the very front of whatever you're working on, you have to define your vision, your goal. You have to align everyone to a common definition of why you're there and what you're moving towards. And the second step is then to communicate this to everyone on the team. And I think this is the most fundamental or the most critical step of all this. The reason I say that is I see us every day in different parts of our life, defining some goal or some vision. And then the communication part too often is someone hitting the forward button on an email, or maybe they just mention it in all hands. But it's one-way communication. It's simply the leader communicated unilaterally to the team. And that to me is not communication. There needs to be a bilateral loop. There needs to be a feedback so that everyone on the team not only hears the message, but they understand the message. And so the part that I feel very personally about is if I, as the communicator, communicating a vision or a goal, don't yet believe that the audience has understood what I'm trying to say, it's my responsibility and it's my accountability to complete that transaction. It's not the audience's responsibility. It's my responsibility. But once that is achieved, and I understand that they understand the issue the same way I do, then you have this common vocabulary, you have this common understanding, and that's the foundation that we've been talking about that yields trust. So
you actually follow these three steps?
I try to do this every day. It's like playing golf. You can do it. You don't master it, but it's something that I work to achieve every single day.
So you actually give that slide to people?
Everyone on my team is very, very familiar with this slide.
Wow. So we have a forum, but where supervisors can access resources. Could we put that on the forum?
I'd be happy to share it with you.
All right. There we go. Now, also, in addition, I know that our audience really likes demonstrations. They like to know how to actually do things. Last time we did a demonstration of what coaching looks like, and I did that with the ED. So how would you actually use this slide? What would the conversation look like if you were working with me?
Well, we would talk about the intent of NAVFAC. We talk about commander's intent. That is something, that term commander's intent, what does the commander expect from everyone, is again a terminology that everyone in my office is very familiar with. And everything that we should be doing, everything the team should be doing should be affecting those goals. And if we're not, we talk about why. We talk about measuring the performance of those goals. And there's a complete level of not only communication of what is the status, what is the action in support of commander's intent, but then if that has not been achieved, it's built into the third point on this slide that people can see and share is the accountability. Once everyone understands the total vision of the goal, and there's no question that it's understood in the same way, what are the accountability mechanisms? And we use everything from performance measurements in our governance process down to the performance evaluations that we have between supervisor and employee through the DPMAP process to make sure that everyone's held accountable to the larger vision and goal of NAVFAC.
That's a real commitment.
But there's a methodology, and you've got to stick with it, and you run it all the way through, and it's predictable, and it's that predictableness of this that makes it familiar, and therefore people understand it, and you achieve trust. Trust isn't not always necessarily what everyone likes. It's simply that everyone has a common view of what needs to be done.
Thank you. So we've talked about what trust is. We've talked about the definition, the business case for it. We've also given you 3 skills, and now it's time to move on to another poll. So you see the poll right here. So as you start to think about this, we want to know from you the answer to this question. And so as we start to think about this, my question for you, Paul, is you think about the 3 skills we talked about. We talked about recognition, we talked about accountability, we talked about transparency. On a scale of 1 to 10, what's the one that you predominantly use most often as a skill set?
Well, they're all very important, and they all need to be part of your strategy. But I'm not sure the right scale number, but I would say tactical recognition is something that I want to work on, and I want to achieve every day, multiple times a day, because that's the immediate. That's very similar to the demo that we did before, where you understood the work that I did, and I understood your level of appreciation, and there was a great dynamic there. So if everything that is happening, there's great things that are happening in our offices every single day, and my role as a leader is to make sure that I've identified it and I'm giving active feedback as often and as quickly as possible. And that's what the terminology that you use, that tactical recognition.
Great. Great. And according to our supervisors, it looks like transparency is the winner for that one.
Okay.
So, great.
Also important.
Also important. All right. It's time now to move into that action plan. We've been talking about it for a while, and there are 2 steps to the action plan. If you remember from our coaching webinar, and again, if you didn't get a chance to look at it, just go ahead and look at the replay. We want you to take this information as NAVFAC transforms its developing of its people and do something with this information. So you see here 2 questions. Go ahead, pull out a piece of paper, wherever you want to take notes. It could be the same piece of paper from the coaching webinar or something different. And what we want to know from you is the answer to these 2 questions. As you start to think about what is the one that you want to focus on, and what are 2 practical steps you can implement right away. We've been talking a lot about practical behaviors, things you can do, how to take things from very big words to actual behaviors. So integrity is commitment. Integrity is, did I do what I said I was going to do? So take a minute now and go ahead and write down what is it for you and what are the 2 steps that you want to implement right away. While you're doing that, we're going to prepare for our Q&A. As we said, there is a chat box feature. And as we start to go to the Q&A, if you have any questions, our moderators have been standing by, and they are going to let us know what those questions are. And most of us on the audience will be able to gather them. We may not be able to answer all of your questions, but we certainly will answer as many as we can in the time allotted. And just so that you know, I'm going to let Mr. Pollock take most of the questions unless we feel like it is one just for us, because I know that we want to hear the best practices from him that he actually implements at NAVFAC on a regular basis. So as we go to our Q&A and we start to think about Q&A, if you have any questions, again, put them on that yellow sticky note. And in the meantime, let's hear from Kate. Kate, what are some questions from the audience that we can answer?
Hi, we have a question from PAC. How do you build trust when leadership continually changes?
Well, that's very applicable in the Navy and in NAVFAC, because with our officer corps, obviously, they're rotating in and out. You've got succession management and change in civilian leadership. And myself, the example that we gave about me, I've moved, from community to community. And I go back to my original answer is that if it's about the desires or the demands of a particular leader, then you're going to be vulnerable to those changes in tone and in leadership. And the more effective answer is really to focus everyone's collective effort on the goals and the needs of the Navy through the lens of what NAVFAC is required to do in our mission, through the lens of and informed by the strategic design that the chief recently introduced to the community. And if we're focused on the larger good, then the fact that leaders come in and out of the organization becomes less of a disruptive factor.
Thank you. Kate, what's another question from the field?
I have one for both of you from Southeast. Are there any cultural or generational nuances to building trust on teams?
This is a question I know that you have thoughts about.
So the answer is yes. And it's a yes and. What I mean by that is everything we've talked about builds trust, and every single person is unique. That's what we call your identity. Your identity is shaped by many things, your family of origin, ethnic, social education, all that type of thing. And so, yes, there are things that you need to think about in terms of what shaped them, and therefore, what is it that builds trust with them. And so if you think about examples of when you go overseas, there are certain things you do, you don't do. If you're not aware of that, you're going to break trust. And so, yes, when you are working in another area, when you're working with different people, really to leverage that diversity, to learn, to have conversations. Hey, talk to me about you. Who are you? What do I need to know about you? That alone, getting back to your thing about the one-on-ones, will build trust. And then also saying, hey, is there anything I should know that would honor and respect your culture? That way you won't inadvertently break trust by accident. Any thoughts on that, Paul?
Well, I'll go back to you asked a question on why I spend, or how can I spend so much time having one-on-one discussions with everybody. I'll tell you that my personal experience, coming primarily, I'm from Hawaii. I lived there all my life, and obviously very used to the culture there. Served at NAVFAC Hawaii and NAVFAC Pacific, comfortable with that culture. And when I moved to the Washington Navy Yard, the culture of the East Coast is very, very different. So one of the ways that I acclimated was to do what I said was, I didn't really say much. I sat and I listened, I talked to every single person. And through all of those engagements, I learned a lot about the cultural differences so that I wouldn't inadvertently stumble into something that maybe was an unintended cultural different approach that would be perceived in a way I didn't intend. Mm-hmm. And so, stop to listen is a great way to be culturally sensitive to wherever you're at.
Yeah, and again, going back to our first webinar on coaching, listening is one of the primary skills. And I'm sure no one said to you, hey, here's what you need to know about East Coast culture.
No.
But watching the body language, listening to the word choices, that gave you a sense of what it was that was important to that person.
Yes, absolutely.
Great. Thanks, Kate. What are some other questions from the field?
We have one from Robert asking, when interviewing candidates for supervisory positions, how can you determine that a candidate will be a trustworthy leader?
Wow, that's a great question. I would like to hear your views on that first.
So there's a couple things you could do. The first thing is, in interviews in general, it's great to know what someone's values are. So values is not ethics or morals, it's what's important to you. So just by asking that question, what do you value? What's important to you? You get a sense of it. And if they use the words integrity or trust or something like that, you get a sense that that's important to them. So one way is just to ask about someone's values. This is a great best practice in general. You can also do situational things. So give me an example of where you broke trust, or give me an example of how you rebuilt trust, right? That will tell you a lot by how they answer those questions.
So Ann, I'm glad that you answered it that way and set up the discussion that way, because from a practical perspective, what supervisors are very familiar with in the interview process is establishing a common list of questions that get answered to all the candidates. And at many times, those questions are situational scenarios. And through the approach that each candidate takes through those scenarios, you can learn the different aspects that you just articulated.
So I guess the best practice would be to add those types of questions to your list. If you like the suggestion, just adding it to your list.
Exactly.
And that will then help you know about the trust and how to build trust with that person. Thanks.
Great.
Kate, what else do we have?
Hi, we have a question from Lant. What do you do when trust has been broken between supervisor and direct report, and how do you rebuild it?
Great question.
Wow. So we talked about rebuilding trust very briefly earlier on, but in that situation, you have to assume that the expectations of each party are different. And you gave some examples of how that exists in earlier in this discussion. So so that's happened in some way. You have to rebuild. I would go through the same steps that the Covey book discusses, and we talked about in the seminar, in terms of working on your personal self-trust, your integrity, and then coming to a common understanding with that party where there's broken trust. And my suggestion earlier is, don't make it about you and your beliefs. Make it about the larger organizational goals and the goals and the mission that we're asked to do, and then look at it from the other person's perspective on how you can make them successful. And by having those discussions, you're going to find or going to achieve some level of common ground. And the more common ground you achieve, the faster you can rebuild that trust.
And I'll piggyback off of that. It takes a while to rebuild broken trust. It does take a while, and so don't expect it to happen overnight.
True.
It takes a while. There's something that we call confirmation bias. So confirmation bias is when you believe something, and then you're always looking to confirm it. So let's say, for example, that I don't find you trustworthy, right? And then you do something. See, I told you he wasn't trustworthy. See, I told you can't trust him, right? So we call confirmation bias. It's a very normal thing. And when I feel like trust has been broken as a human, I'm going to go to confirmation bias first. And so just to realize that it does take some time, and again, going to those steps that we talked about, just one by one, little by little, rebuilding it.
Great.
Kate, what else do we have from the audience?
Hi, Christina had a great comment about the communicator needing to adapt their style based on the type of audience they have to effectively build trust, and the other person's style might not necessarily match yours, slow pace versus high pace. Do you have any comments on that?
Oh, absolutely. I think that speaks a lot to those cultural differences that we talked about, and in my personal life, the cultural differences and approaches between the culture in Hawaii and the culture in Washington, D.C. And it really is understanding the perspective of your audience, understand the perspective of the person that you're talking to, and relating in ways that they appreciate and they can absorb. And so you need to adapt with every conversation. There's no question about it.
I would add on to that it's important, as you said earlier in different words, that it's up to the communicator to adapt to the communicatee. That if I am East Coast and you are Hawaii, that I need to slow down. I don't expect you to match me. And it's really important for that to kind of make sure that we are the ones who are doing it.
Great.
Any final questions, Kate, before we start to wrap up?
Yeah, one more question from Salim. Given that churn is one of those things that depletes transparency, what actions can we take to break the churn where it seems like we have an issue that continues to come up and it doesn't get resolved?
Well, that's kind of a generic question. I think it may affect, your strategy may be different from situation to situation. Depends on really the nature of the churn, the nature of the issue. My initial thought would be to elevate the discussion to the larger purpose why you all are there. And typically, when you elevate a discussion, you're going to eventually achieve a common understanding across all parties that everyone can recognize. And once everyone recognizes a common point, then there is immediately a level of trust. And then you can start building back down into more detail to continue to maintain that alignment of thinking.
Mm-hmm. So one thing I'm noticing, Paul, that you're consistently saying is finding common ground. No matter what's going on, is find common ground and build from there.
Absolutely.
Great way to end our Q&A, great way to end our webinar. Before we wrap up, I just have a few reminders and another poll. Again, we want to know how things are working for you. We want to know how the technology is working. So you'll see the third poll and final poll here. Please go ahead and just let us know. We look at all of your feedback immediately, and we're constantly trying to improve. So let us know how this technology is working for you. A couple other reminders before we say goodbye. First of all, as you start to think about if you couldn't be here live, you are going to be able to listen to the replay right after this, so please go ahead and do that. You will get a CLP, Continuous Learning Point, for listening to the webinar as well as for filling out the post-evaluation survey, so please do that. We will be sending those out on Friday. A couple other things, making sure that you're looking at that forum for supervisors. There is so much information there. Information about topics that we have been talking about, as well as information for you. Post questions. Let us know where you're challenged. Talk to each other. It's a forum for supervisors to share information. So go ahead and do that and let us hear from you in places that you want us to. Lastly, want to let you know we do have another webinar coming up. It is February 27th at 2 o'clock Eastern. We are so excited to have Miss Cindy Riedel with us, and she is going to be talking with us about feedback. Want to thank all of you for joining us today. Paul, thank you so much for joining us today, and would love for you to wrap us up a few final thoughts about how to apply what we've been talking about as a supervisor to day-to-day operations.
I would sum it up into two basic things. You need to take care of your people by understanding their needs and understanding how you can remove the barriers to make them successful, because when they're successful, then your whole mission is successful. And then the second goal, the second technique, is to make sure that everyone on your team understands their purpose, why they exist in support of the United States Navy. And if you do those two things, you will achieve, I guarantee you will achieve a level of trust that makes your team work better together.
And on that final note, just a reminder, we do have a webinar coming up on purpose with Admiral Korka. So be ready for that one. Thank you, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you again.